Okay, so I want you to picture this. Just imagine this really striking visual.
Here, I'm with you.
A man is sitting entirely alone in this dark, damp prison cell, right? And he's just quietly tracing a circle in the dirt floor.
Wow. Okay.
Then cut to a monk walking completely silently through this freezing, just desolate mountain pass. And then cut again. You have an ancient Athenian philosopher standing right in front of his judges, totally refusing to flee his own execution.
Which is just wild to think about.
Exactly. And finally, a modern protester standing totally alone in the middle of the street, facing down this impenetrable line of armored police.
That's a powerful set of images.
Right. And there's this quote from our sources today that perfectly ties them all together. It says, "Freedom is not a place. It is a posture of the soul."
A posture of the soul. I love that.
It really hits hard. Because today, we're taking a deep dive into what is arguably the ultimate human struggle, which is this terrifying desire to just belong to yourself.
Yeah, the desire to truly be free.
Exactly. What it actually means to be free and, why we crave it so deeply, but also run from it at the exact same time.
Mm-hmm.
And we're doing this by looking at a documentary script called Philosophies of Freedom alongside these really fascinating research dossier.
And what's really unique about this deep dive is how we're anchoring these massive real-world philosophies to a fictional universe.
Yes, the book San Vitae, The Awakening.
Right. Because when you trace human history across vastly different cultures and eras, you see this exact same desperate search, right?
Yeah.
People want the right to belong to themselves.
Always. It's like the one universal constant.
It really is.
Yeah.
So we're going to map out the mechanical differences and how various traditions actually define this freedom, why the psychological weight of it is so incredibly difficult to hold on to, and how the fictional character Curian from the San Vitae universe perfectly embodies this journey.
I'm so excited to get into Curian's story because it acts as this perfect mirror for the real world.
Absolutely. It reflects the mechanics of oppression, trauma, and liberation that operate in our actual society.
So let's start with the ancient view of this, because they had a very, very specific internalized definition of what it meant to be free.
They really did.
Take Stoicism, for example,
Yeah.
and specifically Epictetus. I mean, this guy was literally born enslaved.
Right. He lived his early life in physical chains.
Which is just crazy to think about when you read his work, because he taught that freedom has absolutely nothing to do with what happens to your physical body.
Nothing at all.
It is entirely about maintaining this absolute unyielding control over your own mind.
Yeah, to understand Epictetus, you really have to separate your physical reality from your psychological reality. He argued that, if a master can command your body to perform labor, but they cannot force your mind to agree with it.
Or emotionally break under it.
Exactly. If they can't break you internally, the master doesn't actually own you.
Which is such a radical reframing of power.
It is. The Stoic mechanism for freedom relies on this idea that humans possess an internal citadel. You always, always retain the ultimate veto power over your own reactions.
So someone insults you.
They haven't actually harmed you unless you grant internal assent to that insult. Mastering that internal veto power for the Stoics is the only real path to liberation.
Okay, I get that. But there is a limit to that, isn't there?
How do you mean?
Well, you can sit in a cell and master your mind, sure, but you're still sitting in a cell. You're still actively participating in a society that puts you there.
That's a very fair critique.
Which brings up the cynics, like Diogenes. He looked at the exact same problem but took a radically different path. Where Epictetus built this fortress in his mind, Diogenes found freedom by just actively rejecting the external game entirely.
Oh, Diogenes is fascinating.
Right. I mean, the guy chose to live in a barrel in the street. He lived in absolute radical simplicity.
Because he realized that if you desire the things that society offers, status, wealth, a comfortable bed, a good reputation, society can use those exact desires to control you.
They become leverage.
Exactly. His form of freedom was an active, almost aggressive refusal to participate in false social norms. If you don't want anything the king has to offer, the king has zero leverage over you.
He would literally publicly mock the rich and powerful, right?
He would, just to demonstrate that their hierarchies were complete illusions. His freedom was the freedom of the exile, but by choice.
But see, even Diogenes' approach has a mechanical flaw.
Oh, for sure.
Because if you spend your entire life rebelling against a system, like if you're sleeping in a barrel just to prove a point to the elite, that system is still dictating your actions.
Yeah, you're just doing the exact opposite of what it wants.
Right. Your focus is still entirely on the hierarchy. And I think this is where the Eastern traditions, specifically Taoism, with thinkers like Laozi and Zhuangzi, offer a completely different angle.
They really do. In Taoism, the artificial constraints of society, the titles we chase, the ambitions we harbor, the rigid moral codes we impose on ourselves, those are the exact things that trap us.
They're making the trap themselves.
Precisely. Laozi and Zhuangzi believe that true freedom emerges not from fighting the system, like Diogenes, and not just from internally enduring it, like Epictetus.
So where does it come from?
From unforced action. It's about letting go of the need to control your environment entirely. Harmony replaces domination.
So you aren't trying to master the world, and you aren't spending all your energy mocking it.
Right. You flow with the natural order. You become like water, just moving around obstacles without rigid resistance.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy. It's like wearing a really high-end pair of noise-canceling headphones in a chaotic screaming room.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right, because you cannot control the noise of the room. People are yelling, alarms are going off, it's total chaos.
Yeah.
But you absolutely command your internal acoustic environment.
You completely control what you hear.
Exactly. But, history marches on. And eventually, this purely internal definition of freedom starts getting challenged in a big way.
Yeah, this brings us to the Enlightenment thinkers of the 17th and 18th centuries. They completely flip this ancient paradigm on its head.
Which is a massive shift. We're talking about folks like John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Stuart Mill.
Yes, the heavy hitters of Enlightenment liberalism. And what they introduce is this massive mechanical change in how we actually structure society. They introduce the concept of freedom as an external political right.
Because prior to this, rights were basically viewed as privileges.
Yeah.
Right, like things granted to you by a king or a state.
Exactly. But Locke argued that individuals possess inherent rights simply by existing in a natural state. You own yourself by default.
So the government doesn't give you freedom.
No, governments are artificial constructs created specifically to protect the freedom you already naturally possess.
Okay, wait. I struggle with this shift to the moderns.
Why is that?
Because if freedom is suddenly defined purely by external things like having voting rights, legal protections, the absence of physical coercion by a monarch, does that actually make us free?
That's the big question.
Right. What if I live in a perfect modern democracy with every political right imaginable, but I am deeply addicted to gambling? Or I'm completely paralyzed by social anxiety?
You're externally free, but internally trapped.
Exactly. The government isn't coercing me, but I am definitely not free. Doesn't this purely external definition kind of fall apart there?
It does, and that is the exact tension that forces us to look deeper. If the ancients said freedom is purely an internal mindset, and the modern said it's a set of external political conditions, what happens when you collide those two ideas?
You get a mess.
Well, you get existentialism. The existentialists bridge this gap by asserting that the individual is the final, absolute authority of meaning.
Oh, okay, so it's not just internal or external.
Right. You aren't just reacting to the world like a stoic, and you aren't just a product of your political rights like a liberal. Your identity is authored. You create it from scratch.
Which brings us to the terrifying psychological reality of what freedom actually demands of us.
It is not a comfortable philosophy.
No, it's really not. I mean, the existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre famously said, "We are condemned to be free."
Condemned.
Condemned. That is such a heavy word to attach to something we supposedly want so badly. But the sources point out this core premise. Freedom begins where excuses end.
It completely shatters the illusion that freedom is this pleasant, relaxing state of being.
Yeah, it's not sitting on a beach.
Psychologically, humans simultaneously crave freedom and are absolutely terrified by the mechanics of it. The dossier actually breaks down 3 major psychological hurdles that make freedom so difficult to bear.
Okay, let's go through them. What's the first one?
The first is that freedom requires total responsibility. When you are truly free, every single choice belongs to you alone.
And choice creates intense anxiety.
Massive anxiety. The cognitive weight of knowing that your life is entirely in your own hands with absolutely no safety net and no one else to blame is crushing.
Because it is vastly easier to have a scapegoat.
Oh, always.
If a boss or a cultural norm or a really restrictive government tells you what to do and your life turns out miserable, you can just point a finger. You can say, "They did this to me."
But if you are entirely free...
The only person responsible for your misery is you, which is a tough pill to swallow.
Very tough. And that leads right into the second psychological hurdle, which is that freedom requires self-authorship.
Meaning you have to write your own script.
Yes. Without a hierarchy above you dictating your purpose, you literally have to invent it yourself. And historically, humans shy away from this self-authorship.
Because it's exhausting.
It is. Think about the structure of human societies for thousands of years. Hierarchies, dogmatic religions, strict cultural expectations, they all function by providing a predetermined script.
They tell you what career to take over from your parents.
They tell you who to marry, what constitutes a good life, and what happens after you die. Existential freedom strips that entire script away.
So you're just left in the void.
Exactly. You have to define your own values and create your own meaning out of nothing.
It's the difference between, okay, think of it like the difference between being handed a paint-by-numbers kit versus being handed a completely blank canvas.
Oh, I like this analogy.
So the paint-by-numbers kit, which represents a strict societal hierarchy, is incredibly restrictive, right?
Yeah.
You just fill in the blue where the number 2 is.
Right, there's no creativity.
It is incredibly safe. You know exactly what the picture will look like when you're done.
There's no risk of messing it up.
Exactly. But the blank canvas, that's existential freedom. You have a palette of colors and you're just told to paint a masterpiece. It is totally liberating, but it is utterly paralyzing.
Because where do you even put the first brushstroke?
Exactly. What if you paint something terrible? What if you ruin the canvas?
And that paralysis is exactly why the third psychological hurdle is so vital. Freedom requires immense courage.
To face the blank canvas.
To face it alone. To be truly free is to stand entirely alone. It's the willingness to risk failure without that societal safety net. And most importantly, it's the willingness to confront oneself.
Because freedom is not comfortable.
Not at all. It is a transformative state. It requires a continuous, genuinely terrifying act of stepping into the unknown and owning the consequences.
That fear of the blank canvas, that vertigo, explains so much. I mean, it explains why human history is just littered with examples of people willingly handing their freedom over to authoritarians, or comforting myths, or massive systems of control.
We desperately want the paint-by-numbers kit.
We do. Because the alternative is so scary. And this dynamic, it doesn't just play out in secular philosophy or politics. It is deeply embedded in theology, too.
It really is. There is a profound theological paradox regarding spiritual freedom. Different religious traditions frame the actual mechanics of liberation in vastly different ways.
Like Buddhism, for example.
Right. Buddhism sees freedom as liberation from suffering and the cycle of attachment. Mechanically, if you eliminate the craving for permanence in a temporary world, you eliminate the suffering, achieving spiritual freedom.
But then you look at Christianity and it's framed completely differently.
Yes, Christianity often frames freedom as liberation from sin, but achieved through submission to a divine will. You find true freedom by aligning with a higher power.
And then Sufism.
Sufism frames it as liberation achieved through the ego's ultimate dissolution and finding union with the divine.
So the paradox here is that some of these traditions emphasize strict obedience to a divine law as the only real path to true freedom, while others, like Taoism, emphasize liberation from all humanly constructed laws.
Exactly. Freedom is framed as this final destination you reach, but also an ongoing, agonizing spiritual struggle you have to engage in every single day.
Which brings us back to the fictional world of San Vitae, because this story acts as such a brilliant magnifying glass for all these complex human experiences we've been talking about.
It really does. In the lore of the book, society is rigidly divided. You have the San Vitae, who are the ruling elite, this immortal class that has controlled the world for centuries.
And then you have the humanis, the subjugated underclass.
Right. And the San Vitae use engineered scarcity, terror, and myth to maintain absolute control. By keeping the humanis constantly focused on mere survival, they prevent any chance of self-actualization.
They provide the ultimate oppressive paint-by-numbers kit for their society.
That's exactly what it is. The San Vitae claim their rule is a necessity for order. They completely embody the philosophy of control, operating on the belief that human beings simply cannot be trusted with the blank canvas.
They believe freedom inevitably leads to chaos.
Yes. And into this hyper-controlled, rigid world steps our central character, Curien.
Ah, Curien. He's such a fascinating character because he's a conscript, right? He's been trained and basically used as a weapon by the ruling class his whole life.
He has, and his journey perfectly embodies all the existential philosophies we have been unpacking today. His awakening isn't your standard fantasy trope where the hero just fights the bad guys to start a physical rebellion.
Right. It's not just a sword fight.
No, it's a profound, agonizing act of psychological self-authorship. He has suffered immense trauma under the San Vitae, and that kind of trauma often leads to identity fragmentation. the mind literally breaking apart to cope with an unlivable reality.
But that fragmentation forces a crisis for him.
Exactly. He must either remain a fractured tool of the hierarchy, or he has to forge an entirely new, integrated self.
And to do that, he has to actively reject three very specific things.
The first being the identity imposed on him.
Right. The Santry trained him to be a protector, this instrument of their will. He has to look at the script they handed him and say, no, that is not who I am.
Second, he has to reject the morality assigned to him. The ruling class tells him that their violence is totally justified, that their order is sacred and necessary.
So he has to author his own moral code from scratch.
And third, he must reject the destiny written for him.
By doing all this, he becomes sovereign over himself, which, based on everything we've discussed, is the ultimate act of freedom.
It is. But notice the mechanics here, and how closely this mirrors Sartre's warning about being condemned to be free.
Oh, yeah. Because by rejecting the Santry script, Curien takes on the terrifying burden of existential responsibility.
Exactly. He has to answer for his own actions now. He has to answer for his own violence and for his own demon aspect.
Which, in the lore, is this physical manifestation of his repressed rage and survival instinct.
Right. He can no longer say, I was just following orders. The safety net is completely gone.
So, okay, objectively looking at Curien's situation, isn't he just trading the physical chains of his oppressive world for the incredibly heavy, terrifying existential burden of having to invent his own meaning?
He absolutely is.
Like, he loses the comfort of certainty. He loses the ability to blame the Santry for his choices.
He does, but that loss of certainty is the cost of entry. Freedom is not given, it is realized.
Oh, that's a crucial distinction.
You don't just magically receive political rights or break out of a prison cell and suddenly live happily ever after. You have to realize freedom in both senses of the word.
You have to wake up to the fact that you possess it.
And you have to make it real through the agonizing process of choosing your own path. Curien's struggle amplifies the universal human struggle. He chooses his truth and his meaning, even when the entire architecture of his world threatens to crush him for it.
Man, that is so powerful. Let's try to synthesize the ground we've covered today, because we've gone deep.
We really have.
We started with Epictetus in Physical Chains, examining the mechanism of internal sovereignty and the mind's ultimate veto power.
Then we moved to the modern political thinkers who redefine freedom as an inherent external right protected by law.
Right. And from there, we waded into the terrifying blank canvas of existentialism, where the burden of choice rests solely on our own shoulders.
And finally, we saw all these mechanics play out through Curien, who had to tear up the script society handed him and author a completely new self.
The central thesis connecting all of these frameworks, the ancient, the modern, the existential, and the fictional, is that freedom is not just the absence of chains. It is the deliberate presence of self.
Exactly. And understanding these philosophies reveals the beating heart of your own daily struggles. Because, most of us do not live under an immortal council like the Santori,
Right.
but we absolutely live under the weight of corporate hierarchies, cultural scripts, social expectations, and our own past traumas.
We all have our own paint-by-numbers kits pushed on us.
We do. And every single time you make a hard choice based on your own authored values, rather than just taking the easy path of conforming to what the crowd expects of you, you are engaging in that exact same terrifying act of self-authorship.
That is such a profound takeaway. And it actually brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with. If true freedom requires the agonizing burden of self-authorship, it begs a really difficult question about how we live right now.
Oh, where are you going with this?
Well, think about it. As we rely more and more on algorithms to curate our daily choices,
Yeah.
What media we consume, who we date, what routes we drive, what products we buy, are we quietly handing our existential freedom over to code? Right. Ask yourself, are we using technological convenience as an excuse to escape the crushing anxiety of having to choose for ourselves?
That is a chilling thought.
It's something to really keep in mind the next time you let an app decide what you should do next. Because, as we've learned today, freedom is not a place. It is a posture of the soul.